The very first question that was presented in the televised debate. Um, I particularly wanted to focus on the economy and job creation. The question was, what is your candidate's plan to address our economy, to grow our economy, and create jobs?
So I'm actually a San Jose State University student, and I'm really happy to be here with everyone speaking about this issue. I think the issue of jobs and the economy, which, really both of the major capitalist candidates avoided completely, is a very straightforward question for millions and millions of people in this country. If we were to immediately make healthcare, housing, and education a right, we would actually create millions of jobs. And we could do so at union wages, doing things that are really important, that we really need. I'm also a public school teacher while I'm in school, and our schools are crumbling. We need to rebuild our schools. We need more, not less hospitals. And all of those things take people doing work. We would guarantee that that work is done at a living wage. And the only reason those things don't happen, the only reason that isn't the program of the presidential candidates, is because they are supporting the major banks and corporations that intend to keep a system running where they, a very, very tiny fraction, continue to extract wealth while doing no work. They don't actually do any work at the top of those corporations. The people who do the work are the people who are not being paid or getting laid off when the people at the top don't make enough profit to keep their company going. So we have a very clear plan for creating jobs, and it would boost the economy immediately, and it would be good for millions and millions of people in this country. Thank you.
Okay, so I heard a lot about immigration during the debate. So my question is simply, what is your plan on immigration, specifically in regard to deportation? So basically Trump's argument is we need a strong border and very strict enforcement. Clinton's plan is to continue the same deferred action programs we've had under Obama, but also keep our border strong and deport more serious criminals. So what is your position on immigration?
Before I say exactly what our positions are, I'd actually like to state that I think the whole discussion around immigration in the capitalist media and also in the past few debates is just so false. It's such a false dichotomy about what's really going on. Because what both candidates stand for is open borders for corporations, open borders when they talk about trade agreements. What does that really mean? It means that the companies and the corporations that exploit other countries, that exploit cheaper labor, that exploit their resources are free to go wherever they please. But then it's the workers that they want to restrict. It's the workers that they want to humiliate. It's the workers that they want to separate their families and put up a border. And no one raises that question. That's a very important question that has real meaning for real people. It's not just numbers of people. It's millions of people. But it's real people's lives. It's what's happening in real people's lives when companies and corporations are allowed to completely and totally gut the corn market in Mexico. And then those people, those very same farmers, are forced to leave their families and come to the United States and work in the most humiliating conditions for an economy that depends on them. It's completely false that anyone would kick them out. This economy depends on that exploitation. So we call, for those reasons, for full rights for all immigrants. For undocumented immigrants, for documented immigrants. All immigrants deserve that right, those rights, full rights. Also, we would put an immediate moratorium on any deportations. We see the largest rise in history in deportations, so this would be immediately stopped. People freed from the detention centers where children, families, mothers, fathers, people are living in deplorable conditions. Our candidate herself is the daughter of immigrants, of very hardworking immigrants, and she herself is a very hardworking person, and we've made that very much part of our campaign to go and speak to people who often say, well, I can't vote. No, we said, no, stop. We're talking about this campaign because it goes beyond today. It's about all of us coming together.
We're happy about it. Natalie brought up the concept of trade and what role trade plays in employment and job creation. So we'd like to ask for a 1 minute or a minute and a half comment from each of you on your opinion or your candidate's opinion on past trade deals and the impending Trans-Pacific Partnership, which has been promised to be passed at the lame duck session of Congress.
Yeah. I want to, if I can shortly, place TPP in the set of all of the trade agreements, starting with NAFTA on January 1st of 1994, because all of the agreements have had a specific purpose, and they're all structured in the same way. And the purpose is to, like I said, break down those borders and free up multinational corporations that are based primarily in the United States and in Europe to go into other countries without the protections that they have against those companies. So tariffs are protections against those companies. Union rights, labor laws are protections against those companies and the profits that they can make. And all of those agreements destroy those. They don't create more jobs for us. What they have done, because of those agreements, is the jobs have been taken overseas because all of these corporations do the very same thing all the time. They search for the cheapest way to make what they want to sell. And they sell it at the highest price they can. That's their law. That's the laws of capitalism, right? So they're doing this, and yes, they'll leave the United States to go where they can find cheaper places. They also do it in the United States. They've left the middle part of the country and gone south to where labor laws allow people not to organize. That's what the labor laws say. You don't have the right to organize, so now you're cheaper. They do it everywhere. Those trade agreements are never in the interest of the vast majority of people, of working people. So we're absolutely against them and recognize exactly what they do for people who are already extremely wealthy.
And Syria. So I'd like to know your position, your candidate and your party's position in terms of our military presence and our interventionist actions going forward in Syria, in Yemen, and Iran, as has been mentioned by both Secretary of State and Donald Trump.
So the Gloria La Riva for President campaign actually demands that we dismantle all the bases and bring the troops home. Stop with the Pentagon war machine. There's one element of the Pentagon budget that wouldn't be dismantled, and that's the funds that go to take care of veterans who've been sadly treated. The way the Veterans Affairs Administration is run and the benefits that are given to veterans are far lower than they should be. So that program would maintain. The rest of it, the trillions and trillions of dollars spent on a war, and I think we saw both the candidates sort of raising this xenophobia, this sort of, that's the march to war. This fear that we're all supposed to be afraid of Syria, that we were all supposed to be afraid of Iraq. It came out later there were no weapons of mass destruction, which we knew was a lie at the time. But there's a constant sort of fear-mongering that's supposed to keep us needing some sort of defense. And there is no need for that defense. There is no need for the trillions and trillions of dollars that go into the Pentagon when our schools don't get what they need. When I have 2 students who live on the street, there's 6 in their tent and they have to live on the street. They don't have housing. They don't have a proper meal every day. I mean, that's the kind of situation we could solve with the Pentagon budget. It should be dismantled. And the question of diplomacy or sanctions not war is a false question. Sanctions are still war. The idea of supporting democratic movements in other countries is also a form of intervention. It's a form of undermining the people of those countries and their right to self-determination. So we disagree with that position. We do not think the United States should be in the position where it's determining what should be done in Iraq, especially when that destroys a country that provided the things we need here. That's what the situation in Iraq was like before the 2 wars that destroyed it. The last thing I want to say is the National Guard is also a question. What does the National Guard get used for right now? They're sent overseas to fight, and then they're brought back into the cities to repress the movements that are against police brutality. That's how they're being used right now. So we should really question that as well, how that money gets used.
The overwhelming majority of our climate scientists agree that climate change is a global emergency. With that in mind, what are your policies and plans, your candidates and parties' policies and plans regarding the extraction, use, transportation, and regulation of fossil fuels?
So the first point in our 10-point program says, for the earth to live, capitalism must end. And I think that's true. I mean, the organization of society needs to change so that we can urgently stop the crisis that's happening in the climate. And the way that changes are happening, they are promoted by the way the environment is treated in the military, by the way that consumption and transportation and all of these things are organized in society. If we thought about it for just a second, we need to make all of the changes that have already been mentioned, so I'm not repeating them. But for instance, public transportation would go a huge way to immediately stopping what's happening in the environment. But there's no political will to organize that because there's no profit being made off it in the same way you can make off the crazy amounts of cars that are being sold to families. You know, on my street, I think each family has like 3 or 4, just because there's so many children now living at home because they can't afford to move out, right? But that kind of consumption needs to be reorganized in the interests of the entire earth and people itself. And I just want to add the DAPL pipeline, the Dakota Access Pipeline, and the issues that are happening there are also related to a recent answer about treaties. If you look at the United States government, the treaties they're always happy to break are with the Native peoples. And that's a continuing issue that's been raised by the Standing Rock tribe. And by all the tribes that are now go on to support this struggle, is the way the earth has been treated, the way people have been treated, they're all linked. And the link that we see is the system, the way it organizes itself. And we can end that. And that's what our campaign's saying. That's why it's so different. We're a socialist campaign. We're the only socialist on the ballot in this state that you can vote for. And that's the first point in our program, is demanding that the climate is protected. That we are making the fundamental changes that are necessary so that, like you said, let's say it in a more positive way, so that we all live and that the earth can thrive, right?
So they did talk about the issue of student debt quite a bit, but I'll frame the question kind of a different way. So what would you do about the over $1 trillion in student debt now? And also, how would your candidates and parties ensure that graduates have access to jobs that will actually allow them to pay back this student debt?
Yeah, as a student and a teacher, this is near and dear to my heart. But the campaign calls for canceling all student debt immediately. So education should be free. It should be universal from preschool all the way through university, as far as you might want to go. I'm planning on stopping soon. But that idea is not actually that revolutionary. It's a basic reform that is needed in this society. It's insane to think that people's parents might be paying off their student debt even after they've passed. I mean, that's happening, where those things are being passed on to families in tragic, traumatic situations. That the banks and their need to make profit might somehow trump, for lack of a better word, the idea that education is a part of our society. That people should be educated, that it enhances the entire society to provide people with universal quality education. There are so many things in the educational system in the United States that could so easily be addressed if we really put some time and attention and thought to it. And the way that school reform is being run right now is not in the interest of public education. It's in the interest of undermining that. So the campaign calls for completely reversing that from every level of the educational system. And then a job is also a constitutional right. So you asked about paying it back. You don't have to pay it back. But you also have a job when you graduate, which is huge. So many graduates right now are facing a situation where they have the degrees, but there is no job in the degrees that you're studying for. And that's not right either. We're training people to be part of society. We should offer that position to be part of that society. And so we think those work hand in hand, and they're very, very central to the campaign and to what we've been talking with people all over the state of California. We've gone all over the state in universities and working class neighborhoods to say this, and people respond immediately.
Last year, 2015, was the first year that the majority of personal bankruptcies were the result of medical cost and healthcare issues. So my question is, what are your candidate or parties' policies and plans regarding healthcare as a human right, and what do you think the role of the government should be in providing
healthcare is a fundamental right. I don't know what else to say. I mean, like I've said for the other issues of education, housing, a job, it's a question of how human beings live. And the way to provide that health care and to lower the costs is to ask, where are those costs coming from? Like, where are those costs coming from? When someone can jack up the price of a single pill, or the EpiPen can suddenly double, triple in price, where's that cost coming from? It isn't coming from some like imaginary place where healthcare just happens. It's coming from the pharmaceutical corporations and the other corporations that are trying to make a profit of whether we're healthy or we're not. And that's the major question in healthcare. And our campaign answers that question. Remove them from that equation. Universal healthcare is also, again, not a particularly revolutionary idea. It happens in countries across the world, where if you need to see a doctor, you see a doctor. Where those doctors are part of a system. And that system is managed and the bids are all done through the government. The single-payer healthcare system. That's the first step that's necessary in this country. It's not going to solve all of the issues. It's not, but it's clearly, there's enough evidence, there's enough research showing that it lowers costs dramatically. And then you start looking at how you can continue to lower those costs, and it's to take those corporations out of the equation entirely. And to think of healthcare as something that is a right, and not a commodity, not a source for someone's profit, who can then go to the healthcare doctor whenever they want because they can afford all the doctors and all the EpiPens. But the rest of us can't. So that's how our campaign looks at healthcare. It's part of a package that are considered human rights and that are very doable when the priorities in the society shift to what do humans need, not do the few profit from. Yeah, so we don't have universal healthcare in the United States, and we have not. So we haven't experienced it. But what we can say is the U.S. government somehow manages to find trillions of dollars to spend for the Pentagon and for other of its priorities at this moment. And they could certainly do that for healthcare. We could certainly have the resources immediately. It's an extremely wealthy country. And it's actually a very well-organized way of delivering something that saves millions and millions of dollars as you move forward. It's preventative healthcare. You don't get this extreme state of sickness before you go into a doctor. That's why that kind of healthcare is so efficient, is you take care of people before they're extremely sick, before they can't afford an EpiPen and they're nearly dying in their asthmatic attack. That's the question of organizing it. And it's not wasteful, and it doesn't mean you have to take on extra costs. It actually reduces your costs as an individual.
All right, so that ends the portion of our moderator Q&A, and now we'll move on to closing.
So we are the only socialists on the ballot. Gloria La Riva is the only Latina on the ballot, the only worker on the ballot in California that you can vote for. And we're running on a 10-point program, and I've mentioned much of that program, but I really encourage people to check it out on their way out. That includes an end to racist police brutality, an end to the Pentagon budget, and the job, housing, healthcare, and education as a constitutional right. Fundamental shifts in this country. And unlike the two capitalist politicians, both of whom lied enormously tonight, and both of whom won't stand up for regular people, for women's rights in the way we need them to. Our party, the Peace and Freedom Party and the Party for Socialism and Liberation, intends to do that. We're in the struggle for socialism. And beyond November 8th, beyond even January, we're going to continue to organize because we do believe that we need fundamental change in this country, and there's a way to come about that change. And I'd like you to just consider joining us and signing up with us. Thank you.